Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. I'm here with my good friends, Greg Sterling, John Gerard, and Neil Polacek. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey,
Great.
today I substituted my AI avatar.
Is that a Hey Gen avatar, or what brand did you use on this one?
No, I'm just kidding. It's really me.
Greg 2.0.
Yeah.
Call you Max Headroom.
Right.
Yeah, that's an old reference. I mean, that's like 1980s reference.
Did you train your avatar to be optimistic or pessimistic, Greg?
It's perfectly reflective of my delicate balance between the two sensibilities.
That's right. You trained it on Greg GPT.
Fine tuning there. That's good.
Idealistic yet realistic, like a good wine.
The Greg GPT model.
There we
Right.
go.
All right. So let's dig in here, guys. We got a bunch of interesting stories that have happened over the past couple of weeks. It's been a little bit since our last episode. And OpenAI is potentially worth $100 billion in just a short couple.
150.
150 billion.
150. Yeah, that was the. Yeah.
Yeah. And Save Superintelligence raised $1 billion in funding in their Series A. So
That's crazy.
Yeah, there's some really exciting things that are happening in AI. And, you got your doubters that are saying, is it really worth all that? We'll also talk about doctors using AI to support their claims to insurance companies. Interestingly, doctors have to make their case to insurance companies sometimes to get paid for the services that they provide.
Get it approved even.
Yeah, and so now they're using AI to support that. So we'll dig into that. Let's just jump into it and talk about what's going on with OpenAI. There's massive spending with Meta and Google and Amazon in the AI space. NVIDIA is clearly the winner in all of this so far. What do you guys think? Greg, you wanna lead off with this one?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things, kind of related issues together. So I believe that OpenAI has secured, I don't know what the final numbers were. They were looking to raise like $6.5 billion from investors and then get a $5 billion line of credit from banks, is my understanding. And then they were talking about $100 billion valuation, but this morning I saw that it's bumped up to $150 billion. And I don't know what the finals numbers are, but they're basically raising a massive, massive amount of money. And that's because their costs are so high. And they need a lot of runway to keep going to the point where they can offset their costs with revenue model. And, it's happening across the sector. I mean, there was a chart in the Wall Street Journal in the last, I don't know when this is from. This is from just a couple of days ago. That was talking about investing in this sector. Last quarter was like $53 billion. That may actually be reflective of total spending rather than investment, but it's across the main companies plus investors as I'm reading the chart. So Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, to a lesser degree, Apple, and then all the investment capital going in. $53 billion in a quarter. It's just massive.
Well,
yeah.
Look at NVIDIA's market cap, almost $3 trillion. I mean,
well, they're the beneficiary of
Right.
the demand and the investment, right? They're the primary beneficiary of that. There's a couple of other interesting dimensions to this. OpenAI is contemplating price hikes and pushing more into the enterprise to generate more revenue because they have to start thinking, how are we going to sort of put ourselves on a path to offset our spending? And this is something I think we talked about a few weeks ago, where companies are sort of compelled to spend money, but they don't yet necessarily see the return. Basically, there's a kind of a massive flow of capital in. There's questions about whether or not these companies can ever generate the return for the investors that the investors are seeking, whether the business models are going to be good enough to sustain these companies. There's this sort of frenzy of the boom and then doubts and questions about, how are they going to make money over time?
Yeah, this is a pure infrastructure play, right? This is laying down the railroad tracks or, the fiber or whatever analogy you want to use. But that's what's going on here in this moment in time.
I would say too, so just breaking that down a little bit, one of the drivers for OpenAI to raise this amount of money, which has basically been true in every kind of investor climate. One of the biggest drivers is that they can, right? So
Right.
you put money in the bank when it's available. And right now, money is absolutely available to them. They will, of course, have a good explanation in their investor decks and all their pitches as to how, use of funds. But they probably don't have any idea how they're going to use it in many regards. They know maybe what the next couple quarters of spend look like, but they're raising it because they can, and they're sufficient. Right. And you just said valuation went up by 50% from 100 to 150 billion. Like that's so for the same amount, they can increase the amount of cash they're going to take in by 50% and not change the dilution at all based on that, right? So if they were already okay with raising 5 billion or 10 billion on 100, now they can raise 7.5 billion or 15 billion on 150 and have the same outcome. So that's one thing that's interesting. The other bit is okay, so all the banks come into the table, right? So typically in these setups, when you have an equity piece and a lender piece, lenders, not always, especially in the venture world, but often they're backing hard assets, right? So it's hard to imagine banks coming to the table on any of this stuff that aren't essentially sending their checks straight to NVIDIA for the chips, right? I don't really know. I'm not an economist, so I don't know the implications of this, but I imagine that there are, tech banks out there that have huge exposure on NVIDIA chips, where their lines that they've extended or the loans that they've made for these companies are collateralized with thousands, tens of thousands of NVIDIA chips. And it does sort of beg the question, is there a getting left holding the bag moment somewhere down the line? If you're a bank with that kind of exposure and the whole thing goes weird, hey, congratulations, you get all these NVIDIA chips back. Problem is,
can't do anything.
So it's interesting. I'm sure somebody's speculated on that, but it seems like an interesting thing for somebody to look at.
That is an interesting thought there. One of the articles that I've read, and for a period of time, I don't know if they're doing this as part of this raise, but they're talking about creating their own hardware and their own chips because they're spending so much with NVIDIA, and the market is right now. So you've got a real demand to make the models more efficient so they use less energy for less compute. Yeah. But then also, hey, what if we owned the chips and manufactured those and cut into some of NVIDIA's market share as part of this? And that's definitely on the menu.
And it's worth pointing out too that this is a weird moment in the sense that NVIDIA's chips are primarily GPUs. That stands for graphical processing units, right? And these things were originally architected for driving
for games.
Yeah, for polygon display. And it turns out that the underlying mechanics that require that they have a different chip architecture to optimize that just happen to be quite useful for crypto mining and extraordinarily useful for AI, right? So it's this funny little thing. I mean,
happy accident.
We haven't even really gotten away from using the term GPU to describe all this stuff, and I have no idea what their actual graphical processing business looks like right now. But I have to imagine it's now
quite a bit smaller.
Yeah, 20 to 1, AI GPUs as compared to actual graphical processing units.
They're going to continue to innovate as well, so they're going to get ahead of the market. But if it's all GPU architecture, you imagine if you're OpenAI, you're probably thinking about a new architecture entirely that is germane to their whole platform, completely rethinking, replatforming the hardware. That's got to be a part of this valuation discussion that's happening.
The other side of this story is the impact on kind of energy consumption and carbon production, right? Because this is a new, largely unpredicted scenario that has huge power demands that have all kinds of municipal implications and even, renewables versus
it's going to drive nuclear back on the map. There's no question.
Right, exactly. And I think wasn't there some discussion of somebody's going to use small nuclear reactors to power data centers? Was that
it was Twitter, AWS, or somebody, or maybe
Yeah, but this is a major story that we're not focused on because we're focused on the application of the technology, but it's the real world side of this. You know, the sort of carbon impact, the energy demands, and it could wind up being a very good thing if it spurs for innovation and more kind of renewable stuff, and people really invest in that sector to help bring down the cost of power or make it more readily
Fire
accessible.
up Diablo Canyon.
Maybe the new Chat GPT strawberry with reasoning will create cold fusion in the next 30 days and solve it.
Right. It's like one of the weird kind of unintended
Consequences.
well, it's not a consequence exactly. It is, but it's not, I don't mean it as a negative thing. It's like we could see some real benefits. Hopefully we'll see this is the idealist coming out in me.
Oh,
Hopefully
good.
we'll see some real benefits from this, that the demands for power create new kind of larger socially beneficial. Yeah.
Well, it's definitely going to have to be modernization of the grid and infrastructure to be able to support
Yeah.
this IoT in a more meaningful way. And when you hear ideas around how AI is going to take away jobs, somewhere at the government level, there's going to need to be, whether it's a WPA like kind of project or whatever it is, something is going to have to happen to be able to employ people who are displaced in this market to create this kind of new modern infrastructure that will be a new platforming so that IoT, AI, and other technologies can adapt to it. Well, let's switch gears here and talk a little bit about what's happening in the medical space. Neil, you were talking about this story about doctors using AI to support.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that doctors are turning to AI to start to make their argument for why Sally or Joe needs a procedure done. You know, that's always been the process that they've had to go through. The insurance companies probably have already deployed AI to be the respondent. Now the doctors have AI in their pocket to use as sort of the proponent of those treatments or those procedures. So I just thought it was really interesting, that application in that space. It wasn't about the diagnostic part, which there'll be application for diagnostic stuff and clinical stuff, but this was just the application in the bureaucracy and the fighting over whether Sally or Joe gets this procedure done. And the doctors say they're really happy to be able to have this on their side for change.
What are they specifically doing, Neil? Are they using ChatGPT to create narrative arguments that they submit?
Narrative arguments of why Sally or Joe needs the procedure. And it gives them, you know, as we talked to one of those companies, Greg, the digital agency, where they said their thinking was more thorough and their output was more thorough. You know, maybe ChatGPT or these AI tools in this case allow the doctor to make a better argument because it's being forced by the other side, which is probably using AI to make a denial. This is now using AI to make an accepted procedure.
Spy versus spy. We got
AI
the situation, right?
Yeah.
AI versus AI.
And this is, by the way, I mean, I think we talked about this in episode 1, right? This is classic arms race. This is exactly what happens when both sides start to use a competitive technology that reduces the costs of their interactions to near zero as they ratchet up and ratchet up and ratchet up. And so I think, you know, it will be interesting to see how that plays out, right? Because presumably if all you end up with is two AIs arguing with each other, it's a bit harder to, you know, actually achieve a resolution. I suspect then that adds
back to the human.
It backs. You have to go back to the humans. It adds enough friction to the process where you know it's stalemates. It's all the Waymo cars stuck in the parking lot, like not sure what to do, and get involved again. And you know whatever automation existed before, you can't even rely on anymore. So maybe actually worse in the short term. But you know, and I think that that there's speculation that at some point AI to AI negotiation of business terms or even outcome, you know, insurance, things like this actually could be done in the right way. I don't know. I suspect it would require both parties to get together and figure out how they're going to do it, as opposed to just sicking one another's AIs on each other, you know, with escalating costs.
Well, if you take that to the next place, I mean, just business negotiations, it'll be my AI tool versus your AI tool.
100%.
And what does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. Super intelligence, Nick Bostrom's, sort of cautionary story about what happens next. He talks a little bit about that, about what it might look like for AI agents to engage and negotiate with one another. And I think there's reason to be hopeful about that. If you give those kinds of agents, when they exist, the right parameters, which you're extremely careful about the parameters you give them, it's likely that they actually could deliver optimal solutions, things that kind of match the parameters that both parties have given.
Think about the application in sports agents, in Hollywood agents. I mean, those are ripe. I mean, sports, it's all data driven on one side. I mean, there's a lot that will be done in that space using these things, I think.
I think that's right. I mean, and that begs the question too, like there are certain industries where that kind of efficiency is a bug, not a feature, right? Like sports agents. Like I have to assume that the best sports agents actually wildly oversell, and are able to run quite counter to the data in promoting their client. And, that's what makes their paychecks so big. So I wonder if there's going to be some industries where, probably a lot where this is not terribly welcome, where where emotions are the biggest component of a negotiation.
But it might be forced in by one side because they want to get rid of the emotion.
Moneyball, right? Billy Bean. And like, that was like maybe an early version of that.
It's all data. All data. He could have put a machine to that, and those were the negotiations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes me think about real estate a little bit. I don't know whether this would have equal application there. I mean, the National Association of Realtors was hauled into court for unfair competition, and the commission structure was sort of blown up, where the seller was paying both the buyer and the seller's agent commissions. And so the speculation is that the whole industry is going to change pretty radically. And I'm just wondering if AI, not to take us down another rabbit hole, whether AI gets involved in buying and selling of homes in some way that reduces the role of the agent or flattens the commission structure further. I mean, there are the Redfins of the world and others that have been trying to, kind of marginalize the agent or reduce commissions. And I wonder if there's something that happens with AI now.
Well, the agent's role will be showing a house and explaining why it's such a great house, and then it'll be turned over. All that paperwork that they do today, that'll go to the AI stuff.
That's where we'll start for sure.
Yeah.
I think you raised a really great point there, though, Greg, which is, you could argue that data-driven approach, even without AI, is partly what's gotten us into this weird spot where BlackRock owns, some meaningful percentage of all residential homes, like an unhealthy, meaningful percentage of all residential homes. And, I suspect that the AI-based approach will first benefit the very deep-pocketed PE, types well before it benefits any individual home buyer. And so does it just accelerate that process? I mean, that's a bit of a scary idea.
They're advanced. They're already doing these calculations way faster than individuals are. And if you look at where we are in this moment in time, 10 years ago, even when, MLS systems were just coming online, and that changed, and Zillow completely changed the way people shop for homes now. That technology has evolved now where the agent is a lot more technology driven in general, right? Their whole world is completely driven. My mom's a real estate agent. She, this is not her bag. This is all technology now. And this happens with a lot of agents at this point in time. And if you extrapolate that out and apply AI to this, what we're saying here is absolutely going to happen. We just happen to be in this moment in time, but the adoption of AI and integrating that into these workflows is going to be very disruptive for agents.
As we talk about all these use cases that we can imagine, it's not hard to imagine why these companies are getting so well funded, because the use cases of this stuff just go on and on and on.
It's the sort of Web 2.0 disruption scenario where investors were looking for entrepreneurs who wanted to attack a well-established segment that had a lot of money in it, but was operating in a kind of an archaic or an outdated way. This is the same thing. Everything is going to be reinvented and remade across industries.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things with this conversation originated with doctors adopting AI.
Yeah.
And
Right.
typically doctors are not early adopters of technology, I would say. That's one thing. Another thing also is that it's very important for a physician to make their own call and not have an insurance company second guess their call. So the fact that they're getting second guessed, and this is part of getting paid, that whole process, or getting insurance approval before a procedure is done, that second guessing is happening. It's very frustrating for doctors to go through that process. So the fact that they're adopting AI and the way that they're adopting it is also interesting because they use tools like Dragon Dictation or other, of course, they're all HIPAA compliant tools, but they're using these tools to speed up their own workflow to be able to transcribe what was happening. So now that transcription is already available, they can use that transcription and feed that into
Feed it into models.
create a really efficient workflow. That's a trend. That in and of itself, you genericize that and you say, if you take the text of this conversation and you push it through an AI engine to get a desired result, that is becoming this next wave of AI adoption in a lot of businesses. And it's interesting to see it happen in medicine.
You'll be able to, if you can't already do this, append, AI is increasingly a feature of diagnosis, right? Because there's an enormous medical library that's available and sort of symptom library. And you can just push all of that stuff into this, this argument or this negotiation with the insurance carrier. It adds an enormous volume of information that the doctor might not have had time, or even in some cases, maybe knowledge of to present to the carrier.
I think it's interesting kind of zooming out for a second as we're talking about all this and these applications of AI in the real world to, also make sure to draw the distinction between the various, flavors of AI, right? So the machine learning stuff, which is sort of taking a very large data set and saying, hey, if I see something that only has a piece of the full picture, I can imply what the rest of it looks like based on my learning, my understanding of this very large data set. And the classic example there in medicine is reading an X-ray, right? So you train the thing on lots and lots of X-rays and then it can see a broken bone. And that's machine learning. Generative AI is a very different beast, has maybe some similar roots but we also call it artificial intelligence. That's now being used, as we're talking about here, with the insurers and doctors trying to argue with them. And plausibly some intersection of those two is extraordinarily powerful, right? So, something that uses the generative AI and natural language processing capabilities to interpret a patient's description. And then the X-ray is fed into machine learning, and then all the labs are fed into machine learning, and you put those all together and you get a human readable output in the form of a generative AI diagnosis like that. That's a pretty compelling story.
We could talk a long time about this, but what you raised, John, is a very interesting scenario where the doctor or the practitioner, which could be a nurse practitioner, or it could be a physician's assistant, or it could be an MD, or it could be a technician, their role may be minimized in some sense. If you've got all of this information that you can bring to bear on a question about what is the diagnosis, which is arguably the most important piece of treatment, obviously, if you know what, then you could do the whole process with machines, hypothetically.
Sure.
And you have a human curator at the end of the process who's just making sure that the machine didn't make an egregious error. But from A to Z, it's really, or A to Y, it's really about the machine and all the machine knowledge. I mean, that's a very plausible future scenario.
Yeah.
Your whole medical history, this database of medical information, symptoms, transcripts, X-rays, all of that stuff, you could output a treatment plan, a diagnosis and a treatment plan that would be as good or better than the state of the art that exists in the profession. And where does that leave the doctor?
Yeah. And I think just the way to look at perhaps the economics of it, which is what happens anytime there's this sort of disruption, is really what we're talking about is reducing the cost to get to a good diagnosis by 90 or more %, because you no longer need a very expensive physician to be spending, their 15 or 30 minutes or whatever it is doing the thing. So what happens in an environment where the cost to do the thing goes down by 90%? So one thing that happens is markets can collapse. Like if there's only so much demand for the thing that's being offered, the incumbents can get completely disrupted and wiped out. But the other thing that can happen is that the volume of widgets or services provided increases to offset, right? So, and I'm just right now reading Peter Attia's book, Outlive, which is talking about this idea of, actually getting out ahead of some of these diseases rather than treating the sick person, treat the well person to not get sick. And I think you could make the case that some of that could go to actually getting out ahead of the much bigger iceberg below the waterline here that is all these diseases that are about to happen in the next 10 or 20 years. I suspect that could keep doctors very busy for a while, with the assistance of machines.
Well, there's epidemiology, and then there's the wellness prevention, personal health assistant
Companion.
optimization. Yeah, exactly. There's your companion showing up in a very real way. Health and wellness is one of the primary applications of this. I mean, you can imagine any number of products that are designed to optimize people's well-being, diet, exercise, sleep, et cetera, et cetera. That's on some level the Apple Watch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of it's going on right there, but it's
right.
Early days,
The other bit that's useful is that there is essentially unlimited demand for not dying. You know what I mean? Like that. That's a very much in demand product at all times.
Well, and think about a healthcare system. I mean, healthcare costs are one of the major sectors of this economy. Employment, spending, the government, Medicare, Medicare. There's just massive billions and billions of dollars tied up in this. Imagine a scenario where you have, let's assume that the information is good and these systems all work. Essentially a DIY or substantially DIY healthcare system, which brings down the cost massively because people are consulting these chatbots, getting good information, able to exercise preventive care, minimizing disease. I mean, assumes motivation. The equation gets flipped, which is what you're sort of saying. You're talking about it at an epidemiological level.
John, there is a massive demand for living, and there's a massive supply of laziness. So,
Right. We'll see which wins. Another arms race.
We also are dealing with a very, slow moving sector of the market, which is healthcare. And I don't think you have anybody on either side rushing to disrupt what is currently happening. You've got
the consumers will disrupt it. The consumers will disrupt it because they will be the ones who drive, the demand for these virtual doctors, healthcare assistants, whatever you want to call them, health coaches. And I mean, the bureaucracy of healthcare is so frustrating. Like getting access to a doctor, you have some symptom, you want to know, my daughter got food poisoning, but she thought it might have been the flu. How great it would be if you could just go online, here it is, here's the treatment, this is what you need to go buy, this is how you address it. No doctor involved at all, basically, unless there's a prescription.
There will be some company that emerges like that in the way that Zillow was disruptive in the real estate space and the way that just wireless technology is completely superseded landlines or any kind of connected lines to be able to, create those new products that have emerged from.
The doctors are adopting this stuff because they're inundated with this paperwork. They're inundated. They're inundated writing up notes after the visit. They're going to look to anything to get out of working till 10 o'clock at night every night, or they're going to quit the profession because they're burning out. So these things they're going to adopt it faster than I think we're sitting here thinking.
And just to echo Greg's point, like consumers are going to find a way around this. I live in San Diego. There are a very large number of longevity clinics right on the other side of the border in Tijuana that certainly wouldn't pass muster with the FDA, but are probably doing some kind of interesting things. I think it's only a matter of time before an information product in the medical space that's, pretty directed and is actually giving medical advice pops up in a jurisdiction that is very, very hard to control. And you can't just block the IP coming into the US and tell people not to use it because they'll show up on Discord servers and they'll show up in Telegram and, encrypted chat like that. That seems like a very clear, next step in this with the consumers exerting the pull, Greg, as you're suggesting.
Well, so what's interesting about this is that you've got, whether it's in the real estate market, or whether it's now we're talking about physicians and how AI is impacting their world. Legal is going through its whole revolution as well with AI. Several startups that have raised a substantial amount of money are now looking to disrupt what's going on in the legal category. Neil, you were talking about some examples of what's going on in the legal space a while ago. What are your thoughts on that?
They're like two sides of the equation. They want to hold on to the structure of the industry because it's all driven by billable hours. And if you have, layers and layers of lawyers who can do lots of billable hours, that's how you drive your fees. On the other hand, those people are expensive, and, the clients are going to demand that I don't need the associate who's doing research anymore being billed to me at $500 an hour. I want that done by a machine. And there's going to be a lot of back and forth between clients and their law firms, I suspect, that's going to really be disruptive. My question is, like in all these cases, if you don't have the junior lawyer going to the next layer, the next layer,
Right.
and the next layer, will you ever have a senior lawyer who can look over this stuff and say, based on my experience, this is the right way to go, or that's the right way to go? I mean, we're going to lose that experienced lawyer, doctor, plumber, all these things if there's no sort of path to that path there. That's confounds me.
Well, I don't think we're going to have a shortage of lawyers, but I think that the way that people practice law will be quite
who've been
different.
Through multiple cycles.
Certainly in the courtroom and litigation, the AI will have less of an impact than it will on the transactional side, where it's driven by contracts and negotiation and forms. And, there's a lot of legal software that will spit out, it's like Mad Libs where you can fill in the blank, right, and it'll spit out completed
that's already
document.
happening. It's just going to get better.
Right. It's right. And so I think on that side, you may get some of what you're describing more than on the litigation side, where you need to have people who will stand in the courtroom and who will negotiate with the other side, both in a criminal and a civil context. Those people, I think, will survive. They will be supported by more tools and certainly AI, but the actual work product, which is their negotiation skills, their oratorical skills, their ability to make persuasive arguments, will be substantially still their own. Although in briefs, I'm thinking legal briefs, you're going to see a lot of AI.
Yeah. I'm interested to know what law schools are starting to bake this into their curriculum. What law schools are going to start teaching these people who they're training to be lawyers to move into a world that's changed already.
Interesting story on that. I was at my daughter's open house last night. She's a senior in high school, and we were in her AP Lit class, and one of the parents asked the teacher, "What are you doing about AI?" And he goes, we're telling them to use it because it's here to stay, and we're teaching them how to use it, but teaching them how to use it, not to give them the answers, but how to use it as a tool to help them superpower their thoughts and elicit a response from them so that they start to have a conversation with it that levels up their game and their performance in the way that they reason. And I thought that was a really interesting response.
Yeah, and you said
a tool. Yeah, exactly.
And you look at other industries that when the tools change, there's always some hand wringing over, is it still this pure form of whatever? Like as soon as people, you started using synths in the 80s, or famous musicians were created that never touched a stringed instrument. Like there's some hand wringing in the musical space. Is this still music? Turns out it is. It's just it's very different than what you're used to. But
the slide rule to the calculator.
Slide rule calculator. Yeah, sure. I think the other thing here is like, just in the big picture, it's another demand curve question. Like how much pent up demand is there for legal services that's not being spent because the prices are too high? And if the prices were to collapse by 50 or 70 or 80 or 90%, does all that get released? And do we have more innovation? Do we have more, businesses being created, more startups, more IP? Or do we have more lawsuits? Do we have more friction, more complaints being filed? I'm not sure.
I think it's not a simple equation because many people don't recognize the value of certain kinds of legal services like, planning, estate planning, and, that kind of thing. So there's an educational component, or there's another component there that would need to come in. But I do think that it can radically change if to use the overused word, it can democratize certain things. Forming a business used to be a very complicated thing involving a lot of paperwork and manual effort. Now it's a SaaS product basically, and you can do it almost instantaneously. So we'll see that kind of innovation happen. And so there will be, I was filling out on behalf of the program that Neil and I are running. I was working with some insufferable SaaS procurement platform, and they had a bunch of technical language, tax related stuff. Choose this category, this category, this category. Under normal circumstances, I would have had to consult with an accountant because I'm not an accountant. I just went to ChatGPT and said, "What is this versus this? What are the differences?" Boom, boom! In 15 seconds, I had the answer, and I was on to the next thing. Yeah. And so that's an example of the kind of acceleration that you get that really condenses or collapses the amount of time, removes friction. And so there will be, the easier you make it for people to do things, the more people will do things, right? To your point about entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And that actually is a well-studied, prior to AI, it's a well-studied phenomenon. When you remove friction, regulatory or legal or otherwise, innovation takes a big, steep, incline. And I think that, there's every reason to believe that's happening here.
Well, here's something interesting about the trend of what we just covered, whether it's in real estate, medical, or legal, is that the presupposition in AI and this whole discussion of AI replacing jobs, it's always been framed up in this idea of the low-level jobs will be replaced. But what we're talking about here is not low-level jobs. These are very senior-level jobs. And when you think about the way that the AI landscape is changing, John, to your point, you've had these, machine learning roots underneath all of it. And then you've had generative AI. What just came out yesterday was OpenAI's O1 model, which is a reasoning model, which is kind of the middle part, right? That's taking all the data that's down in the machine learning aspect of this, and then thinking about what the right solution is to create a generative response to that. And when you apply that to really any kind of market, you could see how disruptive that could be across each one of these categories. And then the name of the game is to be really good at harnessing the power of what those tools can bring to you to create efficiency in your workflow and keep the quality high.
Yeah, it does seem like the missing link, and the path to agents goes right through that, and it seems like we could spend a whole episode on it, and maybe we should next week.
That sounds good. Well, we're about time, so that's probably a good place to leave it for this week. Great conversation, guys. We'll pick it up next week, and thanks everybody for listening. We appreciate it.